Hello everybody, welcome back to our YouTube channel, and in this particular video we'll be talking about one of the top picked JavaScript interview question, which is basically the difference between var, let and const. And also don't forget to check out the video till the end, because in the end we'll be also talking about one of the counter question asked after the differences. So make sure you watch the video till the end. So talking about the differences, before moving on to the differences, we'll try to understand the scopes. So what are the different type of scopes available in JavaScript? So we have global scope, we have functional scope, and then we have a block level scope. So what are these three scopes? We'll be understanding the differences with respect to these scopes as well. So talking about the first difference, which is the global scope. So if I talk about the var type of variable, so var type of variable have a global scope and let and const don't have a global scope. By this, what does this mean? In this particular scenario, what happens is, it doesn't mean that if you declare a variable on the top of the program and it will not be accessible. It's not like that. So basically, what happens is, in the case of var, it will also be accessible with the window object. And in the case of let and const, they will not be accessible with the window object. So that is where the global context come into picture, because var comes and is available in the window object, and other variables are just accessible throughout the program with the normal variable name. It will not be accessible with the window object. For example, if I try to execute and copy these variables, and now if I try to, let's say, print the const type of variable with the window, so it will print undefined, because the reason is the variable is not present inside the window object. But in the case of var, if let's say I print window dot b, it will print the value of var, because in this specific case that value is present inside the window object. For example, if I just print this, and if I scroll up and if I try to show you, if you see, b is present over here, and in the case of a and c, it was not. And this is the difference of global context. Now talking about the functional difference. So if I try to talk about the functional difference, so in the functional scope, all of these three variables are restricted into a functional scope. What does that mean? It basically means if I try to access the variable outside of that function, it will not be accessible, similar to the other programming languages. For example, if I declare function abc, and then I try to just, let's say, I'll comment these out and I'll paste it over here. So if I try to, let's say, access these variables outside, what will happen is, in this specific case, it will basically throw an error, because we are trying to access a variable which is not declared in that scope. So that is where we'll get an error saying that a is not defined. If I move this console inside the function, it will be accessible, because that's like a basic fundamental thing. So in this case, it will print the value of a. All right. So, okay. I need to also call this function, obviously. So once I call it, it will be accessible. So it will be able to print the value of a in this specific case. If you see the output, we are getting the output as a. Now talking about the block level scope. What does a block mean? So block is basically nothing but a curly braces. So whatever code we'll write inside this, it will be inside that block scope. So now talking about the three variables with respect to block level scope. So what does that mean? In this specific case, var is not restricted to a block level scope, but let and const are restricted. So what does that mean? For example, if I try to declare these variables inside this block, and if I try to print console.log a, it will give an error, because const variable is restricted to a block, so it will not be accessible outside that block. So it will be getting an error. A is not defined. But instead of a, if I try to access b, since I told that b var type of variables basically will be not restricted to a block level scope, it will print the value of b. So if you see in this specific case, we are getting the value of b as 20. So if you see, 10 is also coming because of the function that I called. So I'll just comment this out, and again I'll try to run it so that you can see the value of b is printed as 20. All right, I hope these three differences are clear. Now talking about few of the other differences which are pretty important to understand. For example, all right, so I'll just comment these as well. So now talking about the another difference, which is basically redeclaration. So what does that redeclaration mean? So basically, if you have declared a variable in that scope, and if you're trying to redeclare the variable with the same name in the same scope, it will give an error or will it work? So in the different cases, it will behave differently. So for example, in the case of var, it will actually allow you the redeclaration. But in the case of let and const, it will not allow the redeclaration. So for example, if I uncomment these values and then I try to, let's say, I'll just uncomment this and I'll try to say var b equals to 30 or 40. So it will print the updated value because var allows a redeclaration. So if you see var is 40 is printed, but in the case of let's say I try to update let or const value, which is c, let's say, and then I try to, let's say, print c, it will give an error because if you see over here as well, it says that cannot redeclare a variable with let or const type. So in this case, it is giving an error saying that c is already been declared. So this is another difference. So only var allows redeclaration. Now talking about reassignment. So what does reassignment mean? Basically, you are trying to update a value of an existing variable. So in that specific case, what will happen is if I try to talk about let and var, they both allow reassignment. So if I say and execute this line of code, it will work. It will update the value as 40 in the case of let. So if you see updated value 40 is printed. But in the case of const, let's say I try to update a as 40, it will give an error because a is a const type of variable and I'm trying to update the const type of variable. So in that specific case, it should ideally give an error saying that assignment to a constant variable is not possible. And same thing works with the var as well. So let and var allow reassignment, const doesn't allow reassignment. But there is a catch. So what is the catch? Basically in the const type of variable, so what happens is if you have an array or an object having a const type of variable, that values can be updated basically inside that array or an object. So items can be updated, but not the entire array or object can be replaced with a new one. So that is another catch. For example, if let's say I declared const obj equals to a equals to, let's say, 10 and then another key as b colon 30. So if I try to execute obj dot b equals to 40, that will work. So if I try to also print the value of obj dot b, it should ideally work. Okay, 1 second, let me comment out the 40 line. So in the case of this specific case, it will work. So if you see the updated value is printed. But if you say that I wanted to update the entire object obj as the new object, so if I try to say obj as this, right, I'm trying to update the entire value as the new value. In that specific case, if you see, there is an error. So you can't update the entire object. I mean, as in you can't assign a new object to it, but you can update the values inside that. Similar thing happens with array type. So these were the basic differences between the var, let and const. But there is another thing that we need to understand that is basically asked in the interviews after this particular question has been asked. So what happens is people generally say that let and const type of variables are not hoisted, but that is not true. So in the case of let and const, they also are hoisted because that's the behavior of JavaScript. It will hoist the variables. But what happens is they are not accessible before their declaration is executed. The reason behind that is the temporal dead zone. What does that temporal dead zone mean? That is basically a time frame where, let's say, all the line of code is behaving as a temporal dead zone for a specific variable which is declared with let or const type, and that is in the temporal dead zone until and unless that declaration has executed. For example, if I try to just comment these out and I try to, let's say we had these variables itself. So let's say I'm having this. So if I try to do console.log, since var doesn't have any restriction, so it will work. So if I try to print the value of var, it will work. It will print the value of var because it is hoisted and it is also accessible. Okay. So if you see, it is working. It is not giving an error. It is printing undefined because the assignment of a value is happening later on. But it is still working and the variable is still accessible. But if instead of var, if I try to access C or maybe A, it will throw an error because of the concept of hoisting. What happens in that case? Because if in this specific time frame, it is in the temporal dead zone. So this particular highlighted code is in the temporal dead zone starting from the beginning. So until and unless this line of code is executed, line number 32 is executed, it will be in the temporal dead zone. And the moment it gets executed, after that, everything is not in the temporal dead zone and the variable is accessible after that. So that is the concept of temporal dead zone. So that's pretty simple. You just need to understand, and hope you'll be able to answer it in your interviews as well. So for this particular video, we have this much for you, and I hope you'll be able to crack the JavaScript interview based on these questions. If you encounter these, do let us know in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe the channel and also share the video so that you don't miss updates from our side, and also your friends can also learn from our videos. Thank you guys.